Hey, Lakewood Park family, here we are in the middle of the week. Again, it's really great to connect with you. I hope your week has been going well. Remember on Sunday, we talked about the realities that no matter what we face, we are worshipers. And the psalmist learned how to worship. He expressed this in Psalm 119. He learned that he was created to worship. He learned the humility of worship. And then that led to an uncommon worship. Well, I hope you, as a worshiper of Jesus, have been enjoying him because he's been changing you. What he says in his word is always true. And he's always good. He's always faithful. He's always true to himself, and he's true to us, his followers. And so as we continue on in Psalm 119 in our series, we're going to be coming into the top stanza. And it starts in verse 81. Now, I'd like to read something to you. Charles Spurgeon, who wrote an entire commentary on Psalm 119, says this of the section, verses 81, starting in verse 81. This octave is the midnight of the psalm, and very dark and black it is. Stars, however, shine out. And the last verse gives promise of the dawn. So about the middle point of the psalm is really where the psalmist reaches his lowest, really. The realities of his situation, the realities of those who are afflicting him. This is a cry. And so in verse 1 it says this, "My soul longs for your salvation. I hope in your word." Now what I love about what the psalmist does here is that while the circumstances around him, the afflictors, the mockers are everywhere, it does not change the promises of the Lord. And I think we can look at our circumstances and realize that while we do struggle, we do have moments where there's suffering. We do have moments where we just really need to cry out like the psalmist does. Our moments can never change the promises of God. They are true. Verse 82, "For my eyes long for your promise. I ask, when will you comfort me?" He's grown tired of looking and trying to find the promises of God, but he has not given up on the promises of God. This is candor. This is a direct cry for help. This is, in a sense, if we could take candor, and we find this all through, particularly the Psalms. In candor, the psalmist cries out in a way that says, "I feel like this, but God, I know you're this." That's a wonderful way to express our hearts when we are struggling, when we are going through suffering, when we are afflicted. "God, I feel like this right now, but I know that this is who you are." The more you do that, the more the Spirit of God is going to meet you right in the moments of where you are. It's a biblical way to express grief. Verse 83, "For I have become like a wineskin in the smoke, yet I have not forgotten your statutes." So what's he saying here? He uses the illustration of a wineskin in the smoke. Well, what does that mean? That wineskin is being dried out. If you know anything about wineskin, it's animal skin, it's leather, and it has to be elastic. And so if you try to put wine into a wineskin that's dried out, it's going to burst, and all the vitality is going to leave. And really what the psalmist is saying here is like, "God, I feel useless. I feel powerless." It's continuing what candor is all about. He feels like he can no longer hold the life-giving sense of what his need is spiritually. It just feels like he's depleted in this. His response is to say, "God, but yet I have not forgotten your statutes." Some more look at what candor is. "I have not forgotten who you are, even as I cry out." He did not become angry towards his God. He did not forsake his Lord. He kept thinking about what his Lord said, and this is what I love about this. He lived in expectation. It's a powerful place for the believer to live in expectation. Our God has not changed. To live in expectation of what he would do. And so that expectation carries him now into verses 84 and 85 and 86. How long must your servant endure? When will you judge those who persecute me? The insolent, remember that's the mockers, have dug pitfalls for me. They do not live according to your law. All your commandments are sure. They persecute me with falsehood. Help me! The cry continues. The experience is real, but his trust is unshaken. He knows who his God is. In fact, in many ways, these mockers were calling good evil and evil good. And so for the psalmist to say, help, he was convicted in the truth of God, and he would not relent on that. That needs to be our cry when we say, help me! To know that our God is who he says he is, and that we do not relent in believing that, in trusting that. Even with our candor, God never changes his mind. What is good is always good. And God will honor that. What is right will always be right. And what is wrong will always be wrong. We don't know what these insolent mockers were trying to do. He says they were pitfalls. There may have been temptation to compromise. Probably would have made his life a lot easier. But he said, no, your commandments, they're sure. In verse 87, he says this, they have almost made an end of me on earth, but I have not forsaken your precepts. In your steadfast love, give me life, that I may keep the testimonies of your mouth. I was reading recently of a missionary family in a closed country. They were there as tent makers. In other words, they had a job that the government of that country recognized as legitimate, but they were really there as missionaries to share the gospel. And one of their boys was at school. And of course, it was a very difficult place to be. It was a Muslim country. And a lot of the other boys began to look at this American boy and wondered about who he was. And there was a very direct question that one of the boys asked in the midst of a group. And he said to this boy, do you believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God? Now, for Muslims, the idea of the Son of God is very, very blasphemous. We know that's the truth, but it's blasphemous. And this boy, this missionary boy said, I do. To which they responded, we can kill you for that. And he said this, if you kill me, I get to go to be with Jesus. At that, the boys left, and he went home and told his parents. And as I think about that, that is the steadfast love of the Lord giving this boy life spiritually, the vitality. Nothing has changed about the goodness of God, even though those around him were trying to set a pitfall. And I think for us, the psalmist asks to be refreshed in the love of the Lord. It's the encouragement. The Lord sends, now this is, I believe, is key. The Lord sends what is needed when it is needed. So while we may not have all the answers, our God does meet our needs. Our God does not forsake. And so in the Lamb stanza, he says this in verse 89, forever, O Lord, your word is firmly fixed in the heavens. And so he just needs to make this point of the unchanging nature of God. And he says, let's look up at the heavens. The constellations don't change. We can look as much as the psalmist could 2,500 years ago or more. And the constellations he looked at are still in place. And that's why he says, look up at the sky. It doesn't change. Our God does not change. He builds on this. Verse 90, your faithfulness endures to all generations. You have established the earth, and it stands fast. By your appointment, they stand this day, for all things are your servants. So what he does is he looks at how the Lord has created and the faithfulness of God in creation. And in the moment, even though he's dealing with such difficult times, he puts it out onto a bigger stage, the faithfulness of God. And he said, you've been faithful to all generations. Your faithfulness endures. There's no question he was thinking back to Abraham. There's no question he was thinking to Isaac, to Jacob. There is no question about that. God, you were the same back then. You were faithful then. You showed your faithfulness. You're faithful now. The same God that parted the Red Sea for Moses is present with the psalmist. He does not change. And even in the circumstances of his life, because he says the earth endures to this day, even though the earth can change, and we know that. We can see natural disasters, we can see earthquakes, we can see all sorts of things, but nothing changes without the Lord's allowance. And that's really what he's saying, for they're all your servants. They do what you want them to do. The psalmist is saying the same thing. If your law had not been my delight, verse 92, I would have perished in my affliction. Don't miss this statement. The psalmist is saying, if I had taken things into my own hands, if maybe I became bitter over the affliction, I could never have experienced the power of blessing that he's experiencing right now. He didn't do it perfectly. There were times he talked about grace. I think that's something we need to consider. Are you trying to take the situation and you trying to put your hands out? Are you trying to take it for yourself and say, I'm going to deal with this? This should freeze us and cause us to say, no, God, it's yours. It's yours. Verse 93, I will never forget your precepts, for by them you have given me life. I am yours. Save me. Now this is reiterating what he's been saying the whole time. For I have sought your precepts. The wicked lie in wait to destroy me. They put the pitfalls in, as we've already talked about. But I consider your testimonies. I have seen a limit to all perfection. But your commandment is exceedingly broad. Wow. He's saying, in my life even, there are things that I'm only going to grow so far in. But when it comes to my obedience, there is a never-ending truth that righteousness will always be right. Righteousness will always be found in complete obedience. There's no limit to his obedience. Even when he felt like there was, even when he felt like the pit was there, even when he felt like, save me, there was no limit to what his obedience will mean in living life for his Lord. I hope that finds us in the same place. There is no limit to our obedience and what it means in the joy of pleasing Jesus and living for him. Enjoy going through the study guide as a life group individually. It's great to meet you in the middle of the week. We'll see you on Sunday.